So now we have this input element. We can type in some value. It can be text, it can be numbers, it doesn't matter, it's just a general input. But what we want to make this input number input, integer. Integer is another name for a number. So let's first change this. Instead of shadow inner HTML, we want to append shadow append. We want to append it an input, and we first need to create an input. So const input equals document create element input. Okay, so document create element input, shadow append input, and now we can remove this. This literally means the same. Okay, so everything stayed the same. Cool. And the next thing, we will now set this input before we append it to the shadow. We set input to be of type number. So equal is missing. So input type is number. Let's see if we try to write some text now. Doesn't work. It only accepts numbers. And we can move up and down. And we can also use arrow keys up or down. It's more visible if I put like a small number. Up and down. Literally the same as clicking those tiny things, which will later we will remove this. But for now, this is how it works. So we have an input type number, and let's set the minimum and maximum for this input. So input.min equals, let's say it has to start with 0. And let's say this input is, I don't know, like an age input. Somebody needs to type in how old they are. So let's say input.max is, I don't know, 120. Or let's say 150, who knows. So let's see if we have a number 140 and we go up, 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 up. It doesn't go above 150. And if we go down, like 4, 3, 2, 1, it doesn't go into the minus. So min and max work, and we have a type. Cool. So the next thing what we can do, so the thing is, with arrows, we don't get under 0 and we don't get above 150, but we can still type in any number, and we don't want that. We want that the number that is typed in can only be from 0 to 150. So we can make like a little function. So first we add an event listener to the input onkeyup, and we say when somebody types something, tell us what it was typed and call a function handle onkeyup and pass in this event with information what was typed in, and also give us access to the input, because we will create a function here outside. I will later explain what I'm doing. So this is the name of the function. It has 2 parameters, event and input. I'm going to say short E and input. And because I'm defining this function outside of this function, you see it's opening and closing here, outside of this function, we don't have access to the input variable which was defined inside of this function. So if we call a new function and we want to do something with the input, we have to pass it as a parameter to this function, so that now here we can do some stuff with input. Otherwise it would just say input undefined or unknown. Okay, so what are we gonna do? We're gonna just say console log e.target. So now if I type any number here, it will trigger this function, and then it will log e.target, which is basically, let's see, it's this input field. So we need actually e.target.value. So type something in, 565, So these are the current values. I'll make this a little bit bigger, and this also. So now what we want to do is, we want to check if this current value, whatever is typed in, is bigger than what we set as our max. Then we don't want this number to stay. So if somebody types this number, we just want it to be set to 150, as much as is our maximum value. The same as here, if somebody clicks more up, it just stops at 150. So how do we do this? We will say a value is a number of e.target.value, because e.target.value returns us a string, but we need a number from that string so that we can compare it with input.max, which is a number. I know this by heart, so it's something that you just learn, and or if you don't know exactly, you can always just log it, and then you see what type a certain element is. That's why I'm using this console log trick. You don't have to do this if you know by heart, but it's a handy thing, like, oh, what do I exactly have, so that you don't have to remember everything. And then we say if value, which is the value that was typed in, is bigger than our input max, we want that the input value is set to 150. So whatever you type, if it's more than we set as a max, we don't want to see that number. So let's see. It doesn't work. So let's see why. So e.target.value, if value is bigger than input max, set the input value to 150. So let's try again. Did we save? No, we didn't save, of course. So, I'm typing bigger numbers. You see, this is the input number, but it resets it back to 150 because that's our maximum. So if I type 23, it's okay. But if I want to type 450, poof, no, it takes only 150. And we want to do the same for minus. So currently you could type minus 10, but we don't want to allow this. So if somebody types a number, so else if value is smaller than input min, then we want the input value to be 0. So now if I type minus 10, it sets it to 0. Okay, so let's try again. So this works well. When it comes to 0, it doesn't go to minus. If we type something bigger than what is our maximum, it sets it to 150. And if we type something smaller than 0, it sets it to 0. Okay? So is there anything else that we can do? Yes, I want to get rid of those keys because we have arrow up and down, and that's enough. So how do we do this? I have a little cheat sheet here. Actually, we could just copy the whole styling and see what happens. So this is the styling. If we have this thing, we get like a really nice fancy styling without these buttons up and down, and the whole logic still works. So let me explain what is happening here. So let me make this a little bit bigger. What do we have? We have a host with a colon in front, and that means everything that is inside of the shadow element. Here I can make a little bit less space. Maybe here I can. So everything in this element will have this styling. Currently, we are having here only the variables defined, which we are then using inside of other selectors. We define variables with minus minus in front of the name, and then we can use them in any of the selectors. So let's see. The first variable is helping us define colors. So this is one way of doing it. Let's have it this way. Upsala. Ah, sorry. There is this element that is making problems. So yeah, we define colors like this using this HSLA that I showed you last time. We could type each time 0, 0%, and then 100%, or we can just say, because both of them have 0, 0, or all three of them, we don't have to type it each time, so we can just use this variable minus minus b here. Then we have minus minus background color, which is using a variable. So here we see that is using a variable minus minus color gray. Then we have variable for shadow, which is this. When we click, we are creating a box shadow, and this box shadow consists of variable xy, of variable shadow blur, and then it has also a certain color, which is also using a variable shadow color and shadow opacity. Okay, you can read more about how box shadow, for example, works by just Googling CSS box shadow and then search for this Mozilla developer documentation, and then you can read. Here you have even some examples. And this you can also copy into your styling if you like this more. I won't now explain all the details about CSS. You can always read about this. I give you one example, and then based on this example, you can kind of try it out and change it a little bit. I think it's easier than going and learning all the possible selectors and stylings and everything. So what else is here interesting? We don't have any outline. So by default, every input has like a border around, but we overwrite it first by making this border background color, which is BG color, which is gray. So it's the same as the input itself, so it's invisible. And then when it focuses, how do we change? How do we make this shadow work? So whenever we focus, we change the shadow color. So shadow color by default is white, so it's invisible. But when the focus happens, we want that the shadow color becomes black. And then the box shadow that uses this shadow color will actually show the shadow, but only when the input is focused. When it's not focused, we don't want this to be visible. Then shadow opacity we also want to change. Shadow opacity is set to 0, which basically makes it invisible. But we set it here when input is focused to shadow opacity focus, which is 0.65. So it becomes visible. And then these lines basically mean that we are removing. So if I remove them, yeah, we get these buttons. So we don't want this. So we add these lines. So that's basically it. We added this function, we added a bit of styling, and we added this input.